everybody. It's Megan Haupert here with From the Ground Up. I want to thank you for tuning into this episode. It's a little bit of a unique episode, but we came across a very special testimony that I thought would touch the hearts of a lot of our listeners out there and give you a little bit more insight to my co-host, Scott Gaulden. So, Scott, do you mind sharing a little bit about your testimony? I know that you were asked by a dear friend to kind of speak. And
well, and I got to tell you, I'm a little bit nervous. This is not something I talk about a lot. I'm not normally that way, but as you know, and many are about to find out, I've got maybe a little bit of an interesting biography, if you will. There's been some things that have happened in my life that are just almost unexplainable. And for several years when I was younger, I was challenged in a lot of ways and had to form a faith maybe a little bit in a challenging manner. But because of some of those things that happened. And for several years, gosh, I would say for probably about 20 years, I really didn't talk to anybody about those kind of things. And I was asked recently by a dear friend to give a testimony to a group of pastors and counselors that were learning how to help people through traumatic situations, how to have a healthy, faith-based approach to handling trauma. And he felt like my story would be beneficial and asked me to speak before this group. It was in an auditorium. There was about 100 either pastors or Christian counselors. And I gave about a 15, 16-minute testimonial about some of the things that happened in my life and some of the ways that I had to approach life maybe a little bit differently, things that I've had to learn. So
I'm excited. I think this has so much value for so many people out there, Scott, even if they're walking a different path that is not having anything to do with autism, just the way you speak from your heart and your experiences and the level of faith that comes along, even in challenging situations, and being able to see big picture, long-term, what God has in store. So I appreciate you sharing this with everybody.
Well, I hope everybody enjoys it.
Really interesting because this gentleman I introduced 6 months ago, I didn't know who he was. My wife and I, and he and his wife, got together with some other reason we related to this, and we're sharing our stories. And it became very obvious to me in that moment that I needed to ask him if he was willing to share his story with this symposium thing we were doing months from now. And so I'm very thankful that Scott decided that he would be willing to do that. I'm very thankful that he is a friend. We are now talking regularly, and he's been hanging out with me. So if you guys can give Scott a welcome.
The big turning point in my life happened on December 9th, 1978. I was 14 years old. It was a Saturday night, and my family had gone to see a high school football game at the old Texas Stadium. We left the game a little bit early because my mom was going to need to take a flight out to visit her mother in California. So we left the stadium and we started toward the DFW airport. We were driving along Highway 183. My father was driving the car. My mother was in the passenger seat. I was seated behind my father. My 12-year-old brother, Stephen, was seated next to me. Just about the time we were to come up to the exit for Esther's Road, all of a sudden there was a loud bang. And immediately I felt moisture hitting my face. I felt little shards of glass hitting my face. I felt wind rushing through the car. All of a sudden my dad turned on the dome light and says, "We've been shot." I looked over and my brother was slumped next to me and he was missing a big part of his head. Besides my brother, that night a sniper who they dubbed the Saturday Night Sniper or the Irving Sniper also shot and killed a man by the name of Ray Andrews. 45 years later, that crime is still unsolved. Nobody has. As difficult as that event was, it wasn't very much longer that I had another event that was almost as difficult. About 6 to 8 weeks later, my father got a call from his doctor. His doctor informed him that he had liver cancer. There were very few cures for liver cancer. There's very little treatment, but he was sent to MD Anderson, and month after month we went down there, and he was given high-dose chemotherapy to try to shrink the tumor. After a few months, they decided to go ahead and do a surgery to try to remove the tumor from his liver. Unfortunately, he developed a post-operative infection. And over the course of the next 9 months, my father was in and out of hospitals, in and out of surgeries, but slowly just dwindled, and finally, 3 weeks after my 16th birthday, my father passed away. As difficult as my teenage years were, they were also very fulfilling. I had kind of a mantra at that time that I think helped me get through the difficult situation, and that was, no matter what my circumstances, I always had control over what my response was going to be. I could choose what my response was going to be. And because of that, as I look back, I think that kept me from feeling like I was a victim through all of this, because I still maintained control. Over the next 25 years, I went on to finish high school, I finished college, I got married, had kids, had a career, and felt like all of the bad things in my life were behind me. Felt like God was going to have the bad things happen early in my life so that now the rest of my life is going to be smooth sailing. That changed in 2002. My third child, Colby, was born. Colby, we didn't make anything about it, but after about 16 months, Colby started to recognize that Colby wasn't developing like all the other kids his age. He was not interacting with us. He was not playing with the boys properly. And we were concerned about it. We went to our pediatrician and said, hey, is there something going on here? And he said, don't worry about it. He's a boy. The boys always develop late. But as time went on, we became more and more concerned. And finally, one morning, we were sitting at our breakfast table, and I turned to my wife and I said, do you think it could be autism? And it was as if you could have pulled all of the air out of the room. And we sat there and thought about it for a minute, and maybe, let's go get him tested. So we went and had it tested, and through a series of doctor's appointments, we were able to find out that my son had a fairly severe case of autism. Over the next several years, we pursued every possible therapy we could. My wife was extremely active in trying to find him therapy. At one point, she really drove to Austin every week just to have him with a therapist that we thought might be any help. At the same time that all of this was happening, I was beginning to have some difficulties in my business. It was like 2008, 2009. If you know anything about owning a business during that time, it was a horrible, horrible time. And I was just feeling all of the pressure, and I was praying to God, God, please cure my son. Please help my business. No matter how hard I prayed, I didn't hear an answer I was looking for. Finally, one night, I remember I told my wife, I was just so frustrated. I needed to spend a little bit of time alone, so I went for a drive. After a few minutes, I pulled the car over, and I had about a 30-minute screaming match with God. I yelled out, why is this happening to me? Why is this my family that's affected by this? Why is it my son? He's done nothing. He's innocent. I expressed to God how angry I was, how frustrated I was. And I'm not going to tell you that God answered me that night. It doesn't work that way. He takes a lot of time. But over time, I began to try to put together an understanding of why things were happening and why I was suffering. And I just started doing a lot of thinking and a lot of studying. And I came up with what I think are 3 really important topics, or at least concepts to think about. And Melissa, thank you for stealing my thunder, because most of this was in the presentation this morning. The first thing is, I had to go from thinking that God had a plan to recognizing that God had a purpose. In today's evangelical society, we like to talk about God having a plan for our lives. And the way we use the word in English, I don't think God has a plan for our life at all. There's 2 reasons I believe that. Because if God had a plan, a detailed idea of what he wanted us to do, then he takes away our free will. And I don't believe he does that. We have free will. And the second thing is that if evil occurs, and it's part of God's plan, then God would be planning for evil, and I don't believe that God participates in evil. So I finally came to the understanding that there's not a plan, there's not this cosmic plan out there for my life. But I did begin to recognize that God has a purpose for my life. In Romans 8:28, it says, we know that all things work for good for those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. A purpose is different than a plan. A plan is something that's put in place before an event happens. A A purpose is something that happens after an event happens that begins to explain the meaning behind that. And as I began to focus on the idea that God had a purpose for my life, I began to see that God was going to use the things that happened in my life to glorify Him. And the more that I could align my life with His purpose, the more I could glorify Him, and the more that He would help me along that path. The second area that I think I had to get my thinking straight is reason versus random. We tend to want to put cause and effect into everything that we think about, especially in our Western thinking today. This happened, and the reason that it happened was because of this. If you read the Bible, and I suggest that it's a good thing to do, and you read Job and you read Ecclesiastes, especially in Job, Job's friends are constantly trying to tell him, this is the reason this is happening. And Job is saying, no, it's not. It's not. The two are not related. And Ecclesiastes, the writer, is constantly saying, I don't know why this stuff happens, but there just seems to be no cause and effect. What I began to realize is that the things that had happened to me were not a reason, but were strictly random. We live in a fallen world. Sometimes evil happens. That night that the cipher decided to pull the trigger, someone chose to be a evil act. And if you think about it, and I talked to the detective about this several years ago, he said, there's no way that someone could aim at a car that's traveling freeway speed in the middle of the night at that distance and actually expect to hit a target. He said he probably just aimed in that general direction and pulled the trigger, and your brother happened to be in that space, in that time, at that particular moment where the bullet hit in that particular spot. It was random what somebody chose to do evil. And I think it's important that as we talk with people, we let them know that sometimes random things happen. The reason for this, and the reason why I say this, is because when we think about God having a plan or God being involved in all of this, it can be really hurtful to somebody that's going through a traumatic situation. I remember a very well-meaning Christian lady came up to us one time and said, God knew what He was doing when He gave you and your wife Colby, because you guys are great parents. I wanted to take that person by the neck and throttle them and say, I don't want an autistic child. I want a regular child. And even though she was well-meaning, it was very hurtful at the time. What I've come to realize is that sometimes the trauma is the event that happens. Sometimes the trauma is the well-meaning person on the other end that's trying to say something nice to you. It can mess with your thinking. It can be very, very painful. The third point I would like to make is I had to start to understand the difference between happiness and joy. In evangelical Christianity today, you think about the way we play God, we almost make God seem like this cosmic genie that's there to just dole out the favors that we ask of Him. And you sit in a lot of church pews and you're going to hear a lot about how if you're a Christian, you're going to live this happy, blessed life. And you hear people talk about, oh, God's just blessing me. Well, when you're in the middle of trauma, it's hard to accept that. It's hard to accept that for some reason God's blessing you, but He's not blessing me. So I had to begin to understand that God doesn't promise happiness, but He does promise joy. And joy is something that's completely different. Joy is being able to recognize that whatever is happening to me, God's going to use to bring Him glory. In John 9, Jesus' disciples come across a man that was born blind, and His disciples ask Him, whose fault was it, or who sinned that this man was born blind? Was it him or his parents? And Jesus says, He doesn't answer either. And by the way, God never answers the why question. I've looked through the Bible. Whenever we're asking Him why something happens, He never answers that question. He kind of dodges that question. But Jesus says, this happened so that God might be glorified, so that God's glory might be revealed. When we're in a struggling, suffering situation, we have to understand that joy is that point in life when we begin to realize that God's using us to glorify Him, and that whatever struggle we're going through is going to have an impact, a positive impact on those around us. It's going to give us an opportunity to serve. If you read the New Testament, God really promises struggle and suffering. There's a point where they're asking him, what does it take to follow you? And Jesus says, you must first deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. I don't believe that when Jesus talks about cross, he's talking about two sticks tied together that you carry around. The cross is representative of unjust suffering. And if you think about it, for Jesus, that cross represented unjust suffering. And I believe that what Jesus is trying to tell us is that if you're going to be a disciple of mine, you're going to have to understand, you're going to have to deny yourself, you're going to have to be humble. And at the same time, you're going to have to deal with unjust suffering. That's part of the path. I think we have to let people know that part of being a Christian is dealing with that unjust suffering. The final point I want to make is, I believe that when we're in these difficult situations, we have to learn that it's okay to be angry with, and it's okay to struggle with God. If you think about it, when God named his people, he named them what? Israel. The meaning of Israel is those who struggle with God. He literally names his followers that people are going to struggle with me. Well, says God doesn't have a sense of humor. But we almost don't want people to go there. We want them to think, look, if you're struggling with God, then you're apart from God. And what I'm here to say is, if you're struggling with God and you're wrestling with God, you're up close and personal. God's got his hands on you. You're working with it. We need to let people know that it is okay to struggle with God, that during that struggle, he's going to be working on us to strengthen us and to increase our faith. It's when we go through these struggles that our faith increases and we become more the kind of person that he can use to glorify him. If you think about it, when's the last time you heard somebody say, my faith got stronger because I won the lottery? That happened. But you can point to lots of situations where people's faith got stronger because of the struggles they went through. So today, where I am, is I have two daughters that are both faithful, both active in their churches, and they both are in careers that work with autistic kids. One's a speech pathologist, one's about to become a behavioral therapist. I have a smoking hot trophy wife that's sitting in the background over there. I've been married for it'll be 38 years this year. She's been an incredible blessing to my life. I've had an opportunity to work with her to help other families with special needs kids. We've worked to help establish a special needs ministry at our church. We're also doing some, not marriage counseling, we're not counselors, I'm not taking your job, but we teach some marriage classes to people with special needs kids, and it's been a blessing. There's been marriages that have been saved that God has blessed because they've gone through these classes. I've got a podcast called Autism, Faith, and Family, so I believe God is using the challenges and the struggles that I've been through to be able to share what's going on and to be able to be an encouragement to others that are going down that path. The point I'd like to leave you with is, I've come to the realization as I approach 60 years old that all through this path, God's been preparing me to be able to do something different in his kingdom than I would have been able to do had none of this happened to me. And when you get to that point, you begin to experience joy. And joy is what Christians seek.
If I've learned anything, and hopefully you enjoyed the testimony, hopefully you got something out of it. If I've learned anything about life, it's what we pursue is critical. You can pursue happiness and you probably will never get there. You can pursue wealth and maybe or maybe not. But the one thing God promises us is if we pursue joy, we will find it. And I believe joy is defined by being able to see the goodness in the struggle. You know, when we're in difficult times, we can see what God is doing in that situation. We can see when people bring compassion to hurting people. We can see when lives are touched. We can see when good things happen, even through bad things. To me, that is what joy is. And I hope that what you gained from maybe watching that testimony was to pursue joy. That joy is what it's about. And hopefully if you're on this path of autism, you're able to find some joy in that as well. So Megan, what are your thoughts?
I don't feel like I can follow your testimony, Scott. I don't really feel like I have a lot of words. If you want to know the truth, I really don't. I appreciate you sharing and opening your heart for others, because I do believe that others are going to find value and benefit from your experiences. And that's what life's about, right? When we have those hard times, we have those struggles, we share those with others so that maybe others can take a different perspective or not have as difficult of a struggle, because they know they're not alone walking that challenging path. So
that's great. Well, for anybody that's watching or listening, if you're in the Tarrant County area, I want to let you know about the Hills Church. It's where I go. It's been a great blessing to my family. We have 3 campuses. All 3 campuses have special needs ministries designed to help you and your family be a part of a church and have connection. So if you'd like to join us, we'd love to be a part of that. Please feel free to connect with me. I'll make sure to connect you with one of the campus's special needs ministries, and maybe you can be a part of that. And Megan, if somebody wanted to contact you, how would they get a hold of you?
They can reach me at haupertconsultingllc@gmail.com. They can also check out my website, haupertconsulting.com. They can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We have our @Autism Faith Family on Instagram, and I also have Haupert Consulting on Instagram and Facebook. So I can be reached all of those different places. If you liked this episode, please be sure to share it and pass it along to others, because we want others to be encouraged by Scott's testimony as well. So appreciate you guys tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed this episode.